everybody. Welcome into week two's preview show here on the PFF NFL show. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That is Carmen Vitali. Carmen, fresh off a Shabuzi concert from last night. So she's hyped up for this show. You know it. And she also told me right before we recorded that the album actually has no skips. I mean, I knew a bar song, but no skips, Carmen?
For me, practically. I know, it's wild. Like, I listened to it on repeat as a whole, and I maybe skip over like one or two songs, but he's so good. He's got so much range. I told you before too, he covered two songs that were not his at the concert. They were Waka Flocka Flame and Bob Seger. I'm like, the range on this guy is incredible. And he was so cool. He just kicked off his tour. I was so lucky to see him in a small venue, because the next time he goes on tour, he's going to be selling out arenas.
Your own stuff, Waka, Bob Seger, that's Ed Reed Hall of Fame type single high safety range right there. That's the transition that we're going from country music straight in the NFL. What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in. We're going to preview every single game of the upcoming NFL slate here for week two. Just like we did last week, we're going to give you a matchup that matters for all these and a plus factor as well. So it'll allow us to cover these games the way that we want to. Which matchups we're really pointing out, of course, in the PFF style that you guys know and love. Before we dig into it, because no bye weeks, once again. So it's 16 up, 16 down. We got a lot of games that we want to get to. As a parent out there, we know that you guys want your kids to grow up to be happy, successful, and financially independent. That's what we all want for our kids. With a UGMA account from Fabric by Gerber Life, you're arming your child with a powerful financial tool to help shape their journey towards financial success. Fabric by Gerber Life, it was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for your family's financial path. With a UGMA account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Now, what is a UGMA account? It stands for Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. While your kids cannot invest while they're minors, a UGMA account allows you to invest on their behalf, gives their investment a little extra time to grow as they grow. No contribution limits on it, multiple tax advantages, SIPC insured up to $500,000. You get no commission fees, just a low, flat monthly maintenance fee. You can join the thousands of parents today who trust Fabric to help protect their family by start investing in your child's future today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. It's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, meetfabric.com/NFL. The portfolios are managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Monthly minimum contributions are required. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right. Even though I feel like we could go a lot of different directions with a Sunday slate, obviously, Carmen, we got to start with Thursday night football. So it's a divisional matchup. And, you know, when I saw this on the calendar, I gave a little golf clap to the NFL. Because you remember the days when Thursday night football used to just be like the two worst teams in the league.
Atrocious.
Dude, and people were just like, what are you doing putting this on? This? Like, Bills, Dolphins, divisional matchup? Playoff teams that could be in the hunt for the top of this division. This is a serious matchup here. So let's start with your matchup that matters. We've got some injuries on both sides. Unfortunately, that's a part of the game now that the season is kicked off. But what do you think about this one? What's a matchup that matters here that you want to focus on?
Yeah, I'm watching Miami's pass rush against Josh Allen, because when kept clean in week one, Josh Allen was 16 of 21, 188 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. This could be the Josh Allen show if Miami does not get pressure on him. And they had 9 pressures last week, which is tied to the 6th fewest in the NFL. So we haven't been able to see them kind of get going. Now, that's not indicative of how this is going to go, especially against a division team that you're so incredibly familiar with. But if you don't get to Josh Allen, which it's hard to because he's mobile, right, you're going to have a tough time here. And especially your back level is going to have a very tough time here.
He showed his superhuman traits, it felt like, last week, and they're sort of come from behind. Not sort of, it was come from behind win that they had at home against the Arizona Cardinals. And the Cardinals didn't exactly have a potent offense in the second half, but still, Josh Allen was able to will that team back and play really well. So I think that that's a really good call out. I think that the matchup that matters for any Bills game this season can potentially involve exactly what you just said. And this one obviously means a lot with Miami needing to be able to get after him, but he is just playing at such a high level right now. He's always going to be the major factor for whatever game the Bills are playing. I'm going to switch to the opposite side of things. I'm going to go with the Miami Dolphins wide receivers versus the Bills secondary. And this, again, we might be starting off with a duh here, but it's a little bit deeper than just the fact that, oh, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are good, because they are. And we know that Miami wants to be explosive. We'll see exactly how much of a mismatch they could be with Raheem Mostert now out. Maybe Devon Achane is out as well. We'll see. But when you look at how the Bills played last week, they played a lot of too high coverages. This was a team that wanted to have two safeties deep at all times. And I think the Cardinals were sort of able to attack it better in the first half. And then that really limited the explosiveness of them in the second half. Kyler really did not attempt very many passes at all deep down the field on this Bills secondary, because they were playing much more conservative. They had the two safeties deep, and they were basically they were daring them to beat them underneath. And they were trusting that they were going to be a team that could rally to the ball and tackle well. When you look at the Bills defense last week, only 4 completions of 10 or more yards. That was tied for the second fewest in the league last year, and had 0 deep throw attempts. So like plays that were not just beyond 10 yards, beyond 20 yards, 0. That's how good they were playing in that too high shell. On the flip side, Tua Tagovailoa, 5 completions of over 20 yards or more last week against the Jags. So to me, that's sort of which one is going to prove to be more powerful? Is it the Bills, and how, I don't, what conservative always kind of like sounds like a negative word, but that's not really what I mean here. The structure of how well they play too high and don't let quarterbacks really target things deep, or is it going to be an offense that is predicated around being extremely explosive? So I think that is a big time matchup that matters as well. What about a plus factor here in this one for you?
Yeah, and now I'm going to go to the Bills offense side of things, and I'm going to say either Dalton Knox or Dalton Kincaid. Miami has the second worst coverage grade versus tight ends. They did last week, and Knox only had 1 catch on 2 targets last week, but he went for 23 yards. And Kincaid only had 1 catch on 2 targets. It went for 11. So you have these tight ends that are capable of these explosive plays, and that can be potential a field mover for the Bills offense, especially as, you know, these younger receivers and new receivers are kind of gaining their footing with Josh Allen, and they're developing that rapport. Josh Allen already has his rapport with his tight ends, and they're really good pass catching tight ends on top of that.
Right.
Combine that against a defense that just isn't equipped to really handle these guys. And I think that could be a recipe for disaster. Again, going back to what I was saying before, especially if you don't put pressure on Josh Allen and he has the opportunity to get the ball out and wait a little while for his tight end routes to develop.
You know, I'll echo you with the plus factor of Dalton Kincaid. He's somebody who I was pumping up big time as we were going into the season, and I thought that he would be a major player in this offense. And last week they got the win, and so, you know, kudos to them. They moved the ball how they needed to. You know, Keon Coleman already proving that he's a viable part of this offense. Khalil Shakir getting in the end zone. Mac Hollins scoring that first touchdown for them. So we saw some of the wide receivers that we said all offseason needed to step up. We saw them step up, but I was surprised that it came, you know, at the expense of Dalton Kincaid not really having a great game. It was 2 targets for him, 1 reception, 11 yards, a lot less than people were projecting, certainly for an opening game for him. But he played 88% of the snaps. So he was still out there a lot. They just didn't happen to throw the ball to them. And I think it's a really good point that you made. A Miami team that particularly struggles with covering tight ends. Is this the matchup where we see Dalton Kincaid come out, right? Is this all right, well, week 1, it was quieter than we thought it was going to be, but now it's more towards the expected of a breakout season that we had for him. I'm very curious to see if that's going to be the case for them. But getting now to the Sunday games, we got, like I said, a lot to get to. So we'll start with Raiders-Ravens. Why? I don't know. Just because it happened to be the first game that I pulled up for the 1 o'clock game. So that's no rhyme or reason here. We will get to all of them, I promise. But what's a matchup that matters here for you with the Raiders going up against the Ravens?
Yeah, this is kind of an obvious one, but it's got to be Max Crosby going against those Ravens tackles. I think last week against the Chiefs, we kind of didn't know exactly what to make of the departures along the Ravens offensive line, how much that was going to matter. Turns out it might matter a little bit. So especially going against Max Crosby, who is due for a bounce back game. He only recorded 4 pressures on 29 snaps versus the Chargers. And we all know that Max Crosby is capable of so much more than that. The Ravens O-line had the 8th best pass blocking grade in week 1, but the turnover on the unit just seems like it's going to be a factor, and especially against an elite pass rusher like Max Crosby. They ranked 13th in percentage of plays that resulted in a positive EPA. The Ravens O-line did.
Mm-hmm.
So it's middle of the pack, and again going against some stiffer competition with a Las Vegas D-line that includes that guy. I'm a little bit worried about it. And what I really didn't like, Trev, last week is I saw them rotating their offensive line. I get trying to get your second round pick, Roger Rosengarten, some snaps, but I am so vehemently against rotating offensive linemen. And we saw that actually kind of across the league in multiple games. I don't know if this is a symptom of a larger issue with the preseason being cut down a little bit more and teams just don't have time to really solidify that front five. But I don't think it works for anybody. And especially when you take the guys on either side of whatever position you're rotating along the line, it doesn't allow them to get in a rhythm or a groove with the guy next to them, knowing how that guy plays and what they need to do to account for him and all that other stuff. It just throws off all of the chemistry along a unit that has to work in tandem with each other. So I'm very much not a fan of that. I hope we don't see it again against Vegas. And I hope it was just kind of a week one thing because, hey, they were opening the season on Thursday. They just didn't have a chance. But if you're going to play the second round rookie, play him. Don't rotate him in.
Yeah. I think I don't have any numbers in front of me to like prove this, but we were
having him switch sides too, which I was like, no.
I think the preseason point that you brought up is a really interesting one because since most teams now only play 3 games instead of 4, I felt like starters played less this preseason than ever, like across the league. Yes. It just felt like teams did not want to play their starters. So it was almost like, because not every team is playing 4 games, they're only playing 3. Do teams think, let's just barely play him at all? Like, let's just get to the starting line. Yeah. Nobody gets hurt. And I totally understand. It's a really tough thing to balance because you don't want anybody to get hurt. But at the same time, I do feel like there's sort of this trend of rotating offensive linemen. And I feel like it often, again, I don't have the numbers. This is just sort of kind of like a feel because you brought this up. I feel like it's more towards the younger offensive linemen. Mm-hmm. But I'm with you. I don't think that's worth sacrificing the chemistry. Like, is this player ready or not? Because if they're not, don't put them out there. I don't think that's really how offensive line play works. And so, Patrick McCarry playing right tackle as the starter, the veteran starter for the Ravens. And then you mentioned Roger Rosengarten sort of like coming in reserve. Max Crosby's also going to be pissed off for this game because he got handled. He got handled by a rookie. Joe Alt got the better of him. There were 19 snaps in which Joe Alt faced either Max Crosby or Christian Wilkins. 0 pressures that he allowed for either of those guys. And I don't think Max Crosby was ready for that level of a rookie, which Joe Alt's, I think, going to be a special player and a really good player for a long time. But I'm so glad that you pointed this out because I think there is totally a beyond the numbers factor here of Crosby's one of the best passers in the NFL, and he's going to be pissed the hell off for this game. So he's going to be going up against a Ravens unit that better bring it, or I think that they could be in trouble. Doing some research for this game, and alley-oop from our head researcher / everything guy at PFF, Dave Salfaro, he was able to point out Minshew actually was pretty good passing the ball beyond 10 yards last week. And it feels like every time, it wasn't a good week for quarterbacks basically in general last week, but every single time I looked up, even the good quarterbacks, it was like, all right, well, filter for the passes that were beyond 10 yards. And it just doesn't feel like everybody played very well. Minshew, on throws of 10 or more yards last week, 8 of 10, those 8 completions were tied for first in the NFL. I believe it was tied for Mahomes. And he had 155 yards passing, which is 4th in the NFL when targeting deeper down the field. Ravens, on the other side, against Mahomes, 5th in 5 completions allowed of 20 plus yards or more, which is tied for the worst in the league. Allowed the 3rd most passing yards on throws of 20 yards or more. And they ranked 5th with 11 missed tackles in week 1. So it just was not a crisp game for the Ravens defense either. They just did not come out playing as well as they could have. Minshew, Mahomes, not saying they're on the same plane here, but Minshew's very clearly not afraid to throw it deep. And if the Ravens don't have their, haven't crossed the T's, dotted the I's. They're on their P's and Q's, whatever you want to say. They're not down to the details. This Raiders team could surprise them and actually push the ball deep down the field more than they thought. So I think that's a big matchup as well. Plus factor, I'm looking at it here. It's Max Crosby for you. So I don't know if you had more. I don't know if you were holding a Max Crosby number that you still want to get, or if you mentioned it. But
I was holding a Max Crosby number. I was holding a Lamar number, and Lamar had the 5th worst grade when under pressure in week 1. We saw the havoc that Chris Jones was able to wreak on the Baltimore offense, almost single-handedly, had that strip sack. That is going to be what Max Crosby is going to aim to do. And you're going to try to disrupt Lamar's rhythm in the passing game in particular. And we have seen so far this season, and again, it's only one game, but we have seen so far this season that Lamar's numbers drop significantly when he is under pressure.
I knew you were holding something. I knew you had a little nugget. I knew I had a little nugget in there. I knew I had a little nugget in there from you that we could get to. My plus factor in this one, I'll go back to the Raiders offense, Brock Bowers. And Brock Bowers played well last week. I'm trying to find what his exact stats were. He had 8 targets, 6 catches, 58 yards. So it's like, okay, not a world beater type of a day, but a 21.9% wide receiver usage, or threat percentage is what we call it here. That was the most of any receiver on Las Vegas. So forget the ramp up period. They're going after this guy. They drafted him in the first round for a reason. They're putting him in the offense. Like, that was more targets per route run than Devontae Adams and Trey Tucker, than all of these guys that were there. So Jacoby Myers as well. Like, they were going to him a lot. And I'm wondering if that continues in this game, because very clearly Minshew was comfortable targeting him, so he is a plus factor here for me. Transitioning from the Raiders to the team that they played last week, Chargers at Panthers. Somebody's got to have the Bryce discussion. I know I will, at least, because we have to. But is he part of your matchup that matters? What do you got in this one?
No, the matchup that matters, and it's something going back to what we were talking about last week even, was the Carolina linebackers and pretty much their front 7 in general against Gus Edwards, and more importantly, J.K. Dobbins, who I was hoping was going to have a career resurgence or revival, battling back from all of these injuries, now in a very run-heavy offense as a whole this season. I've talked about that a lot with Fox, just how I hope that this is the year for J.K. Dobbins. Well, after the first game, it certainly looked like it could be, because he had 10 carries, 135 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, this guy was the Chargers offense. And Carolina defense as a whole last week, they let up 180 rushing yards. So this just seems to be like another really favorable matchup for J.K. Dobbins and or Gus Edwards. I mean, Carolina ranks 16th in versus running backs in terms of grade last week.
Yep.
But they ranked 29th in EPA per play allowed against running backs.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's not a good scene for Carolina in so many ways. But I think that, there's nothing more demoralizing than a team that can just run the ball down your throats. And that's exactly what the Chargers are going to try to do because of Jim Harbaugh. It's just, and not to mention, Jim Harbaugh and his scheme, it kind of splits between inside zone and man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those are some of the worst grades in Carolina's run defense against certain formations. And over 77% of Carolina's snaps against inside zone go for a negative grade.
I was going to say, and it's only getting tougher with Derek Brown out, right, for the season.
Yes, so and now, right, exactly. So now you get rid of your best player, not only on defense, but probably on the team at this point.
Yeah.
And who is a really good run defender.
Right.
And I don't know which way this defense turns, to be honest. It's just, it's going to be some real tough scenes this season for Carolina.
Carolina's in a really tough spot. And I don't want to, pile on, but unfortunately, the way it looked versus New Orleans and the fact that your best player is now out for the year, I'm worried about the morale of this team dropping very quickly, because if signs at least don't look better, if they don't have competitive play within the next, I would say 4 or 5 weeks, I'm really worried about a first-time head coach in Dave Canales being able to sort of like rally the troops here, because there will be guys in that locker room that will question what's going on there. And it's natural if things aren't going really well. My matchup that matters for this game is Bryce Young, but particularly it's Bryce Young versus him being in a deficit. Because you mentioned, okay, like not having Derek Brown, not being able to defend exactly what Jim Harbaugh wants to do. I don't think the Chargers are going to be a team that's, scoring extremely quickly, and all of a sudden the Carolina Panthers are down like 3 scores in the first like 10 minutes of the game or something. I guess it kind of depends what kind of pride and competitiveness the defense has when they show up. But I eventually think the Chargers are going to gain some sort of double-digit lead on this team. Mm-hmm. Is Bryce Young even in a mental space right now to play well enough to consistently push the ball down the field to overcome being in a deficit and actually be a comeback quarterback? Because when you look at it last week, it was bad. It was really bad. Throws of 10 or more yards down the field, 5 of 14, just 113 yards, 2 interceptions. On throws of 20 or more yards down the field, 0 for 4, and that was where one of his interceptions came as well. So Bryce, I went back and I watched his film because we're talking about it for NFL Stock Exchange as well. He looks mentally broken. A lot of what you liked at Alabama just is not there for him. And I'm worried about this team because if things start to go off the rails, I don't really know who saves them at this point. I don't, because I would have maybe said, hey, perhaps J.C. Horn and Derek Brown and Ejiro Evero obviously still being there as a defensive coordinator. Like maybe they can rally around the defense and just be a defensive team and play tough every week. Now that you're down Derek Brown, I don't know if you could even do that. So no. The matchup that matters to me is Carolina is going to be down at some point in this game. Is Bryce Young capable of being a come-from-behind type of quarterback? Because it's not just in this game either. He is going to have to become this type of player all season long if they're going to remain competitive. And I think this matchup's going to be a really, really important one. But who is your plus factor in this matchup?
Well, it goes along with that, and it's an aspect of Bryce Young's game, and it's his time to throw, his average time to throw. And what's interesting to me, and looking all of this stuff up, especially after week 1, you wanted to see improvement from the offensive line in particular, because it was so horribly graded and run last year.
Right.
This year, there is some incremental improvement, at least in week 1. We saw them kind of middle in the pack in terms of pass blocking grades at number 14. That, though, is really challenged and contested by the fact that Bryce Young has an average time to throw of over 4 seconds. He ranks 28th in the league for the 28th, fastest, or one of the slowest. And that just doesn't help these guys at all. Pass blocking in this day and age, it's not meant to be done for over 4 seconds. That's just not realistic against these defensive fronts that you go against in the NFL, and the sophistication of all these defenses and the pressure schemes.
Yeah.
So holding on to the ball, it makes me think that Bryce Young is still obviously not comfortable within Dave Canales' system yet. He's in his head too much. And going back to what you were just talking about with the confidence, he doesn't have it. He's not comfortable in any stretch of the imagination. And it's one of those things where it's feeding off of each other, where he's holding the ball too long. So his offensive line can't hold as long. And then he's not trusting his offensive line. And then he's holding the ball more because he's thinking more about it. It's just a whole mess. And I really, really, really hope that we can see some improvement over these next few weeks, because you're right. Not only from the sense that this team could give up, but David Tepper could give up. And we have seen him be very trigger happy with coaching changes and all of that. And it doesn't seem realistic to keep cycling coaches in and out, but we also haven't seen them be able to kind of stick it out and really try to work with head coaches. I think that also comes with being a first-time head coach. I don't necessarily know that was the best course of action, but here we are.
Yeah. No, and I think that no matter what, like Bryce has to get a go-to guy that he trusts in the pass game, whether it is Xavier Legette, whether it's Jonathan Mingo, whether it's Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, like whatever, whether they were there last year or this year. I feel like he's got to be able to have a receiver that he could go to, especially in, again, those moments where there's pressure, the time to throw could be up. He's not holding the ball as long. He's able to get it out of his hands to his go-to guy. He's got to find that plus factor in this game for me. Is Justin Herbert, only 144 passing yards in week 1, but we know how good Justin Herbert is. And when you look at this Carolina Panthers defense, you mentioned it, the stats, when you go, oh, well, according to week 1, it's not going to look pretty because they got blown out against the Saints. Derek Carr was the highest graded passer in the NFL last week when going up against the Carolina Panthers defense. And so that's what makes this a potential recipe for disaster is I think Justin Herbert's in for sort of a bounce back week as well. So if Justin Herbert's firing all cylinders, if the offensive line's playing well, if J.K. Dobbins has another good game, I think this one could get away from Carolina pretty quickly. That's why we need Bryce to be able to play better from behind. That's really what I'm looking forward, because I think that is going to happen. From the Panthers opponent this week to the one that they played last week, New Orleans Saints at the Dallas Cowboys. Matchup that matters here, Carmen. What do you got?
Yeah, I've got the Cowboys corners going against Saints pass catchers, because it was very interesting. And again, probably a symptom of going against the Carolina defense. But Derek Carr completed passes to 8 different receivers, and he only attempted 23 passes. So he's spreading the ball out like no one you wouldn't believe. And that's really hard to contend with as a defense when you really, truly don't know where the ball is going. It's why the Packers were so incredibly efficient and improved so well last year, because there's only so many guys you can defend. That being said, I think this Cowboys cornerback room especially is going a little bit underrated. And I talked last week, I think my hipster little pick for the plus factor with Kalen Carson.
Yeah,
and
it was.
Sure enough, 45 snaps, he had 9 targets, allowed 5 catches for just 44 yards and 1 touchdown. But that is kind of to be expected a little bit. And I do think that between him and Jordan Lewis, that you're going to see a battle there between the Saints and the Dallas Cowboys, and they're not going to give up much. So you got Trevon Diggs. Obviously, he had 55 snaps last week, 9 targets, 6 catches allowed for 23 yards, and he had an interception.
Yeah.
So,
oh wow, shocker! Trevon Diggs had an interception.
Trevon Diggs has an interception. So it's not only is it underrated, it's a deep unit. Again, shout out to Dave Safaro, because he gave me all of the stats of every single corner that played for the Dallas Cowboys last week. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but it's safe to say that this unit is underrated, and it's going to be interesting to see who's going to be effective for the Saints against them, if anyone.
I think that a lot of people looked at last week with the Saints and they said, well, how 47 points total. Chris Olave has 2 catches on 2 targets for 11 yards. You mentioned how they were able to sort of share the wealth. Can the Cowboys cover that sort of depth at the wide receiver position for the Saints if they continue to play well? Obviously, I think that's going to be a very interesting factor. I'm looking at the Saints offensive line versus the Cowboys defensive line. No shock that the Cowboys defensive line played well as well. Led the NFL with 37 pressures in week 1. Micah Parsons alone had 11, which is awesome. And I know that the reason why this is kind of a matchup for me is the Cowboys defensive line playing well is not a shock. No. How well the Saints offensive line played is a shock when you look at how few pressures they had. They allowed the fewest pressures, just 2 in pass protection as a total team. But on the flip side, you go, okay, is that the Saints being better than we thought going into the year? Or is it, once again, they just went up against Carolina Panthers? Because the Panthers last week, 10.7 pass rush win percentage, which was the lowest of any team in week 1. So which one was it? That's why the matchup that matters is with the Saints offensive line. And specifically, if we go into my plus factor here, the player that I'm watching is Trevor Penning, their right tackle, because Penning had the best single game passing grade of his career over the last 2 years. He was a rookie last year, so I know it's not a huge sample size, but 76.8 pass blocking grade last week against Carolina. That's the best he's ever had in a single game. Now, you get to go up against Micah Parsons a lot. So did you truly improve, or did you just happen to go up against one of the worst defensive lines in the NFL? It might be a baptism by fire here with the with the Cowboys facing the Saints offensive line, but I am very intrigued to see if, because like Talise Fuanga played well as well, like Eric McCoy played well. The whole unit for the Saints played really well. What's it like now going up against one of the best defensive lines in football? So Penning is my plus factor, and the Saints offensive line versus the defensive line is my matchup that matters. Who is your plus factor in this one?
Yeah, I think we're really going to find out who the Saints are this week, and if we can take what they did against the Carolina Panthers seriously. And to me, that starts and ends with Paulson Adebo or Kool-Aid McKinstry going against CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah.
CeeDee Lamb was 30% of the Cowboys offense last year. That hasn't changed because they don't have a true number 2. I know they have Brandon Cooks, and they're hoping that he kind of returns to form of 2 seasons ago. Well, now 3 seasons, I guess, when the last time he had 1,000-yard season. Mm-hmm. But now, you also have CeeDee Lamb running the ball. The Cowboys used him on 3 different rushing attempts out of the backfield, and he got 25 yards last week.
Love
so,
it.
like, not only do you have to contend with CeeDee Lamb on the outside, who there is very few guys better than nabbing those contested catches and then creating separation and length and all of those kinds of things. But also, by the way, he's really fast. And he's also behind a really good Cowboys offensive line when he's running. So there's so many different things that they're doing with CeeDee Lamb right now. If we're going off of 1 week, and I don't know how you stop that. But if you can, it's going to come down to these Saints corners, and maybe a little bit of their linebackers if they keep pushing CeeDee Lamb out of the backfield.
Brian Schottenheimer in his bag, basically saying, "Hey, we paid you, and now we're going to use you on the field
a lot
in any way that we possibly can." But hey, I don't think any fan is going to be mad when their best player gets the ball as much as CeeDee Lamb has gotten the ball over the last 2 years for the Dallas Cowboys. So I think that's a really great matchup as well. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers head to Detroit, a rematch of the divisional round that we saw in the playoffs last year. Bucs coming off of a emphatic win against the Washington Commanders. Obviously, the Lions coming off an overtime thriller from Sunday Night Football, taking down the Los Angeles Rams. My matchup that matters here that I want to start with is Tampa's injured secondary versus specifically the Lions pass catchers, not just receivers, but also you got to throw tight ends and running backs in there as well. The Bucs won against the Commanders, but it's almost like that meme where it's like, at what cost, right? Like, what did it cost you here? Because Winfield Jr. doesn't look like he's going to play.
Reference with Trevor Sikkema, I'm shocked.
Yeah, very, very shocked. Don't say Marvel too loud, or my dog's gonna start barking because that's his name. So look, Winfield Jr. left the game in a boot. Looks like he's got a foot/ankle injury that could have him out a couple of weeks. Bryce Hall, their CB3 on the team, he has a broken leg, so he is out for the season. Zion McCollum left that game with a concussion. They're just, unfortunately, this group was like sort of unproven anyways beyond Jamel Dean and Antoine Winfield Jr., and now you're subbing one of those studs out, and then a lot of the guys that have needed to step up might not be in the lineup either. So it's one story going up against the Washington Commanders that are still trying to figure things out, and obviously I think they all played well. It's another story traveling to Detroit to face a Lions team that got the win last week, but certainly did not play as well as they could have on offense. Amon-Ra St. Brown, only 13-yard receiving. Sam Laporta only had 45 yards receiving. Jameson Williams went off, and I'll get to him in a little later in a couple of minutes, actually. But I think that this group is going to be on a mission to get back to the level that they think that they could play at on the offensive side of things, specifically passing the football. And that's not good for Tampa, that's already beat up and won't have a lot of their scheduled starters in their secondary anyway. So to me, can they slow those guys down enough for Tampa's offense, which looked really good last week, to keep it close and maybe even get a win on the road there against Detroit? What about you? What's your matchup that matters?
My matchup that matters is Carlton Davis against Michael Lynn Evans, the 2 former teammates, or Chris Godwin, or whatever receiver Carlton goes up against, because he is now a Detroit Lion, and he is very familiar with these pass catchers after going against them for years in practice in Tampa. So there's an outside the numbers kind of view there where it doesn't exactly matter how Carlton Davis has been doing or did last week or anything like that. He is now going against guys that he is very familiar with, and he knows their ticks, and he knows how they do things and how they make these incredible catches. He knows that offense very well. It's going to be very interesting. But then there's also, obviously, Terrion Arnold. He had 51 snaps last week, 10 targets, 8 catches allowed for just 57 yards, 3 catches allowed for a first down, but that was it. So he's a rookie, and this was the blemish on Detroit's roster last year was their defensive secondary and how they couldn't keep guys healthy. This year they go out and they get Carlton. Not only do they get Terrion Arnold, they have Ennis Rakestraw. With their first 2 picks in the draft, they took corners because Brad Holmes was like, I am not getting bit by the injury bug in the secondary and not being able to still field a complete secondary.
Right.
So that is going to come in handy though against Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, who looked a lot better. Like I was really scared last season, to be quite honest, that he was just not going to be the same player after his knee injury. And it seems like in the first game, he seemed a little bit more comfortable, and Baker is just playing with so much confidence. I mean, we saw a video from the Bucs that they released because Baker was mic'd up during the game, and he's going on and on about how like Mike Evans in single coverage is cheating because he's just like, if Mike's just single covered, I'm throwing it to him. I don't care. And it worked out last week, so now you need to see what Aaron Glenn has in store for these two guys, and it just going against a familiar DB in Carlton Davis. It's going to be a really interesting matchup, and yeah, I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I think that both of those matchups, like you mentioned, are very intriguing. You know, whether it's the former teammate, because Carlton Davis played 99% of the snaps in their week 1 game, and Terrion Arnold played, I think it was 97% of the snaps. So they're both right there playing a big portion of the game. So you're either going up against a rookie or you're going up against a guy who was your teammate for many, many years that you won a Super Bowl with. So that is obviously going to be a great recipe that you got to watch. My plus factor, I said that I would mention it. Jameson Williams, unbelievable game that we saw against the Rams. He was the big time hero in the passing game. 3 plays of 20 yards or more. So an explosive there from him. A lot of their explosive output came from Jameson Williams, who I think had over 130 yards receiving, if I remember that correctly. But again, you're going up against a secondary that is so depleted, and they're not going to be afraid to send this guy deep. And to be able to play really great deep coverage, you got to have great communication and chemistry along the back end with the safeties in particular. So no matter what, even though Jordan Whitehead is still there, Winfield Jr. not being there and often being a reason why you can sort of play cap coverage and keep things in front of you and not let these deep routes get behind you, he's not there. So does Tampa have the ability to dial up pressure the way that we know Todd Bowles wants to, yet still stay sound on the back end of their defense for a guy who is as fast and as explosive as Jameson Williams is? So to me, he has to be the plus factor in this game. If he has a similar performance, it's going to be really hard for Tampa to be able to keep up with that Detroit offense. But it could also just end up being fireworks all the way around for both of these teams. But what about you? What's your plus factor here?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when you talk about how Jameson Williams went off, but Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta didn't have huge games, it's because defenses were keying in on, or the Rams in particular, were keying in on those two guys knowing what they're capable of. Jameson Williams has been a huge question mark. He has not been able to live up to the role he was supposed to play on this Detroit offense, which is to stretch the field and be that explosive kind of gadget guy. Now that teams know that he is still capable of that, they're going to account for him. Here's the thing, when you're talking about the injured secondary in Tampa, they don't necessarily have the bodies to contend with all 3 levels of this defense. So what you really need to do is get a push up front and just prevent that ball from ever coming out. We also know that Jared Goff is much worse under pressure. And if you can do that, it's a big if, but it's going to be led with Vita Vea up front because Elijah Cansey is battling through an injury. Logan Hall is not playing. So now you have to figure out how to get that with literally just Vita. The good news is Vita's capable of it, but you have to get that push from the interior and the edges, of course. We did see Jared Goff last week, though, handle pressure really well. He was 5 for 7 for 90 yards and a touchdown. I don't know if that was more of an anomaly or if he has actually just gotten better in the face of pressure. I wouldn't put it past him with an offensive coordinator like Ben Johnson, but your best bet at this point, because you're just not going to be able to cover all the different kinds of weapons that Detroit has, is to get to the quarterback. And Vita is going to have to be leading the charge, quite literally, up the middle.
We're going to talk about what the Green Bay Packers can do to handle the talent of Anthony Richardson in a second. But before we get there, TD, Tutty, taking it to the house, in for 6, whatever you guys call a touchdown out there, one thing is for sure. Touchdowns matter more. That DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, whether it's on the ground, in the air, special teams, defense, whatever. We don't care how they score them. We just want to bet touchdowns. DraftKings Sportsbook is the number one place to be able to bet touchdowns. We just talked about what could be an electric matchup between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Detroit Lions. If you think that that is going to be a touchdown fest and you are ready to place your first bet, try betting on something simple. Pick that game and just pick a player to score a touchdown. It's as easy as that. New DraftKings customers can bet just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets instantly. Plus, you also get NFL Plus Premium on them for 1 month. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Use the promo code PFF. That's code PFF for new customers. You get $250 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. And you get that 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on them. The offer ends September 19th, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. If you got a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, it is 877-8-HOPE-NY, or you could just text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, help is available for problems with gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario, Oregon, and New Hampshire. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gambling resources, see dkng.co/FTBALL. NFL Plus Premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at NFL.com/terms. Packers at Colts. No, sorry. Colts at Packers. Can't take a home game away from the Packers like that. What are you doing, Trev? This is going to be interesting because obviously no Jordan Love. If Jordan Love was in, it'd be, a little bit more of two of the good young quarterbacks in the game. I guess maybe I'm sliding Malik Willis here. I don't know if you're predicting the big time Malik Willis game because it looks like Malik Willis is now going to start in Jordan Love's place. But what's the matchup that matters here? Does it involve Malik Willis? Are you going somewhere else? What do you think about this game?
Yeah, no, I'm going to go somewhere else. My plus factor will have a little bit to do with Malik Willis, obviously.
Okay, but all right, we'll get there. That's a good teaser.
We'll get there. Good teaser. Green Bay secondary against these Colts wide receivers, just given the potential of Anthony Richardson, who attempted not one, but two passes of over 50 yards when the rest of the league, there was only one other person that even attempted one, and it was CJ Stroud. So
and it was in the same game.
And it was in the same game. We saw just the most incredible display from Anthony Richardson. He's obviously the biggest question mark for the Colts this season. The first outing was very, very encouraging. And then you contrast that with the Packers in week 1. Now, I want to preface this by saying I'm not gleaning too much, especially off of one game, but especially off of a game where the playing surface was not good. We saw these guys slipping and sliding absolutely everywhere. I'm not going to hold it against most of these players for not playing up to the level that we think that they're capable of. For instance, after 1 week, Jair Alexander is the 125th ranked player that has played on the outside. Not great. He allowed a 66.7 completion percentage when targeted, and he allowed 4 receptions in 6 targets. That's not good for your number one corner, and who previously was the highest paid corner in the league. I don't expect that to keep up, hopefully. You also have Eric Stokes back, and he did decently well too. Again, I'm just not going to glean too much off of one game, but they had a 28th ranked coverage grade in week 1, so it was not good. And when Anthony Richardson can clearly nail, especially on those long plays, it makes me a little bit concerned because he is going to isolate and attack those outside corners in particular, and you need to be buttoned up if you're Green Bay, and now that you're back on solid ground, literally.
No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, when I went back and I watched Richardson's film from last week, obviously you marvel at the incredible 50-yard throws. There's no doubt about it. But, there were throws that he left out there. There were some inconsistencies to his game, but there were also just some absolute rippers over the middle where, I mean, Texas defenders are close to where the ball is. And if he doesn't have the tier 1 arm strength that he does, that ball is not getting completed. But in fact, it did because he does. And I think for the Packers defense, you always have to be very, very ready for that. This guy can make a throw that very few other quarterbacks can make. And you just got to not let it burn you. More often than not when you're playing a guy like Anthony Richardson. So I think that's a really good call out there. I am going to talk about my Malik Willis for my matchup that matters. And it's specifically because Juju Brents, the outside corner for the Indianapolis Colts, goes on IR. They were already thin at outside corner. Like Juju Brents was the main guy that I think they looked at and said, okay, you've got to be CB1 on the outside for us this season. He is now hurt. He is now on IR. Kenny Moore is good as their slot defender, but there are still way more question marks now with their outside corners. I think it's Dallas Flowers, it's Jalen Jones, it's Samuel Womack. Like, it's guys that still really have to prove themselves. So for Willis, who has never finished a game in which he has played more than 10 snaps with a passing grade above 50, this is kind of a right matchup here. You're at home. You got a plethora of wide receivers to throw to. Like you've had an extra 2 days, 1 day, whatever it is technically, to be able to prepare for something like this. This is a game where he should play relatively well if he is capable of doing so. And just to sort of marry that with my plus factor, Jayden Reed has to once again, I think, be the plus factor for this team because, he was a major player in the game against the Philadelphia Eagles. He played very, very well. And I think the depth of the receiving options that Green Bay has is great. But in particular, Jayden Reed had 68 yards after the catch against Philadelphia. That's sort of the situations that you want to put him in, right? Malik doesn't have to throw it 50 yards down the field to go get 50 yards. Sometimes you only got to go throw it 5, and then Jayden Reed will take it the other 45. So I think that this week, even more than last week, they need to lean on Jayden Reed because I feel like he could be the type of player to get Malik Willis warmed up a little bit so that he can really start to attack those outside corners, especially when we get into the second half and when it's winning time for one of these teams. And so, yeah, I think that it is Packers fans should be cautiously optimistic about what Malik Willis can do in this game because I think it's a good matchup for it, even though I think a lot of people would look at this team and say, hey, major downgrade from Jordan Love. That doesn't necessarily mean that this game in particular is going to look ugly. It could look a lot better than people think for the Packers. But you mentioned that you were kind of hinting at a Malik Willis type of call out for your plus factor. So who you got?
A little bit. So it's interesting because if you look at the Green Bay offense in the first 10 weeks of last season, the playbook was very, very conservative. It was short passes because you do have receivers that can get the yards after the catch. It was leaning on the run game as Jordan Love kind of got going. And sometimes even to the detriment of the Green Bay offense because the run game wasn't really being as productive as you wanted it to be for injury or otherwise. You have Josh Jacobs now. He is my plus factor because he is someone that this offense can rely on to move the ball. Now, he had 5 rushes last week that gained 10 or more yards. So that's a first down right there from Josh Jacobs to be able to move you down the field. That ranked 3rd in the league last week. So I'm very much expecting that this offense now, especially with Emmanuel Wilson kind of coming on too in the backfield, where you still kind of have that rotation, even though A.J. Dillon went down, I'm expecting this to be kind of a run-first offense because Malik Willis is a really good runner too. And making the defense kind of contend with all 3 of those guys is pretty tricky. It's not what defenses are built to do anymore. So I really expect this playbook to kind of where it opened up after week 10 last year with Jordan Love and his plethora of receivers. I'm expecting it to shrink back down to what we saw early on in the season last year for Green Bay as Matt LaFleur tries to get Malik Willis comfortable in this offense. Keep in mind, Malik Willis did not come into the Green Bay. He did not spend preseason with the Green Bay Packers.
Right.
So he is still very much trying to learn. And I think that basically Matt LaFleur is going to pull it all back and make it very, very basic and really try to lean on this run game a little bit more to move the ball down the field. And then hopefully Jeff Hafley's defense can continue what they started last week, which was, oh, hey, we have Xavier McKinney now. We're just going to go out and intercept the ball, and we're going to stop you in your tracks. They're going to lean heavily on the defense too, I think, as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see what this offense looks like because I do think it's going to look drastically different than what we thought we were going to see with Jordan Love.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you there. The next game, Cleveland Browns at the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'll start with this one. My matchup that matters, a little curveball here for you folks. It's Deshaun Watson versus Jameis Winston. That's my matchup that matters here in this game because we are getting closer to Cleveland having to make an impossible decision to bench the most expensive, uncuttable, untradeable player in the NFL in Deshaun Watson. Yeah. Because last week, it just straight up was not good. Now, it wasn't, it's I don't want to say it was all on him, but a lot of it's on him. He's got to straight up play better. You have that tag. You're getting paid all this money to play much better. 56 dropbacks last week. That was the most in the NFL. Yet the EPA per pass for this team was 25th. Watson was just 3 for 12 when throwing the ball 10 or more yards down the field. And I think that is really the point here about Deshaun Watson with this play on the field is that he does not feel comfortable. It does not look like he can throw the ball deep down the field. I don't know if his shoulder still hurts. I don't know if it's something that is still he is still working out from his injury last year, if he's ever going to be the same or what. But they held him out of the preseason because of general arm soreness. And they try to just say like, nah, it's not a big deal. He can't throw deep. He couldn't throw deep last week against the Cowboys. And so there's got to come a point where you go, this team is too good to just continue to throw Watson out there, no matter how much money you are paying him. Because Jameis, to be honest, might be better than him at this point. And I don't think that they're going to bench him this week, but that is truly the matchup that matters here. Is Deshaun Watson even capable enough to show that he's better than the backup quarterback on the team, or is the only reason why you're playing him because you're paying him? And this is going to be another question to answer in that. Obviously, there's some stuff that we get to talk about with the Jags as well, but if it looks as bad for Deshaun as it did last week, you are going to have to start having the conversation of, it does not matter how much you're paying him. You are losing games by keeping him out there because the rest of the team is just too good. Not that they're perfect, but the rest of the team is too good to be failing on offense with him as a catalyst the way that it has been. So that, honestly, that is my matchup that matters most.
Yeah. No one made you give him that contract. No one made you do that vote of confidence, especially with everything going on.
They did that themselves.
I don't feel bad for them when it comes to that. I do feel bad for the rest of the team because the defense is still great. Myles Garrett is arguably one of the best players, not arguably, he is one of the best players in the league. He could be the best player in the league. And so my matchup, I saw that, you were going the Watson route. So I'm like, all right, let me go the opposite. Let me go Myles Garrett and the Jags tackles. Because he had 27 snaps last week, 3 pressures, 2 quarterback hurries. So I want to, the Jags tackles are just going to have so much on their plate between if they rotate where Myles Garrett is. They're also, they didn't do well last week. You got Anton Harrison gave up 2 sacks, 4 pressures. Cam Robinson did better.
Yeah,
he didn't give up a sack. He had 1 pressure allowed. So I'm like, all right, maybe that's not the side they attack them. And that's going to be just really interesting to see how you can get to Trevor Lawrence through Myles Garrett, because there are not many guys, if any, that can truly contend with Myles Garrett, and especially when you have question marks along the offensive line for Jacksonville. I'm not confident that that's going to go well for them.
My plus factor, I'm going to go back to the Jags, or I'm going to stick with the Jags on the offensive side of the ball. Brian Thomas Jr., their rookie wide receiver. Look, only 4 catches for 47 yards last week, but he had a touchdown. When you dig into all of the plays, all the snaps that he had, especially receiving snaps, Carmen, this dude is going to be a stud. I mean, he is going to be awesome. When I watched him at LSU, the question was not, is this guy incredibly talented? Because he is incredibly talented. It was, does he have the ability to become a better, more versatile route runner? Because basically everything that he ran when he was at LSU was a comeback, a slant, a vertical route, a post. That's basically all that he was running. It was very simple stuff. And he was so talented, and LSU's offense was so good, you didn't really need anything else. I think he was top 3 in all of college football in deep throws and average depth of target and all that good stuff. It's just what he did best, which is why I love the pick for Jacksonville, because it's what they want to do. But I'm watching him last week. I already see better route running. He's able to stop on a dime well. He's able to set corners up with inside or outside leverage. We didn't even get to work him over the middle very much for these yards after catch opportunities. He ended up having the highest threat wide receiver usage for any of the wide receivers on the Jags last week at 22.7%. And he had the highest QBR when targeted on the team at 145.4. Obviously, the touchdown helps with that. But to me, I think that this guy's going to start to get more looks when it matters. Obviously, they threw the touchdown to them when they were in the red zone, but it was like a 3rd down thing. I think they're going to start to prioritize Brian Thomas Jr. on 3rd downs in between the 20s and on early downs when they get into the red zone, especially within the 10-yard line as well. I believe that we're going to continue to take steps towards this guy being a stud and their wide receiver 1, because I was so impressed with just the movement skills, the improved route running, everything from this dude. He's awesome. Who's your plus factor here?
Yeah, well, really quick on BTJ because they did joint practices with the Buccaneers, and I talked to some of the Bucs coaches about BTJ in particular because I now have a vested interest in LSU and wide receiver U, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
It's
Sure,
not
sure,
it's not
sure.
DBU anymore, unfortunately. It's wide receiver U still, and every single one of them was like, "This dude has it. He's going to be so good." And this was he was that's absolutely why he was drafted. He was to climb up to that wide receiver one spot. I think that he's going to end up having a wonderful rapport with Trevor Lawrence, but he has whatever it is. He's already very, like his floor is so high, and then you just mentioned it how the route running has even improved from from college to preseason to now the regular season. Like this ascent is going to be quick for Brian Thomas Jr.
Yep.
Right? Yes. I went the other side because of what we were talking about before with Sean Watson not being able to get this pass game going. Well, then what are you going to do? You're going to try and lean on your running back, and you're going to try to lean on Jerome Ford. The thing is, though, the Jacksonville Jaguars only let up 81 rushing yards to the Miami Dolphins, who had two different running backs with 12 carries. But Jerome Ford only had a 3.7 yard per carry average last week versus Cowboys. So I don't know how this is going to go. It's how like the Jags so far, again, only one game sample size, have been good against the run. Jerome Ford has not been able to get going, but neither has any part of the Cleveland offense. So something has to give here. And if it's not Deshaun Watson, it's got to be the backfield. And it's going to be even worse because you have both tackles are hurt when it comes on Cleveland. So I don't know how it's going to go in the run blocking game for Jerome Ford. I don't think they're going to make it easier on him. But Cleveland's going to need it if they want any sort of offense and want to complement this defense, because this defense probably isn't going to let up a lot of points, but you still need to score some.
Two teams with big wins last week. The Niners took down the Jets. The Vikings took down the Giants. I guess I should have said two teams that took down the city of New York and their NFL teams last week. So it's the Niners traveling to Minnesota this week for this matchup. My matchup that matters here with these two teams, San Francisco's run defense, specifically against the Vikings run game. When you look at San Francisco in week 1, so against the Jets, 12th in EPA per rush allowed. And Breece Hall, one of the better backs in the league, obviously. So he's very, very talented. I thought that they handled him pretty well, specifically Fred Warner, who from the broadcast, I haven't gone back and watched the tape, but like from the broadcast, it just looked like he had one of the best games you're going to see from a linebacker this season. Just unbelievable play from him. So I think that being able to bottle up Breece Hall is worth noting. But when you go back to last year, this San Francisco run defense unit was not one of the best in the NFL, 24th in the NFL in EPA per rush allowed. Now you're going up against a team in Minnesota that wants to run the football. Aaron Jones last week, 94 yards on 14 carries. He had 5 rushes of 10 or more yards. He had 6 rushes that were gaining a first down. Like, he was a major part of the offense. And Sam Darnold played well as well. Complimentary football, as coaches would call it. But I think first and foremost, they want to establish things on the ground. And if there's anywhere where you can really attack this stacked Niners roster, that's kind of it. So I think that, Sam Darnold revenge game, obviously. I don't know, revenge game. He played on the team last year. But I think that the run game is going to be a big factor in how close Minnesota can keep it. And I think what they showed us last week is that they are a team that, all right, maybe they're not winning the Super Bowl this year, but they're going to be really tough to go up against. This is one of the best rosters in the NFL. It's a great test for them to get at home. So I'm very curious to see if the run game stays as potent as it did last week versus the 49ers this week. What about you? What's a matchup that matters?
I'm going with the San Francisco run game versus this Minnesota defense. Christian McCaffrey is a long shot to play. That's what came out today, or on Tuesday, rather. Wednesday. I don't know what day it is. It's fine. Jordan Mason, though, no longer an unknown. He had 28 carries, which was the most by any San Francisco running back in franchise history, which is really crazy to me considering the running back usage in Shanahan's system. Not in San Francisco. It was under Kyle Shanahan. But Kyle Shanahan is no stranger to using running backs. In fact, he uses 21 personnel. He did it last week at 21% of the time, at the highest clip in the league. So they're no stranger to running backs, and this offense goes through its running backs in various ways. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that they just run the ball, obviously. But I'm very interested to see how they make up for still not having Christian McCaffrey and having Jordan Mason be accounted for, basically, at this point. I mean, no one had film on him before. No one could account for him. Now you do. Watch out for him. So does that mean that we see Patrick Taylor more, or does that mean that we see Deebo Samuel in the backfield more? I'm really interested to see how the Niners kind of adjust, and then therefore how this Minnesota defense ends up accounting for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't know how this is possible, but somehow the Niners offense is Christian McCaffrey proof, which is really weird to say as one of the most talented backs in the league. But I mean, Dominic Pooney, Trent Williams, like those dudes just have being road graders in the run game against the Jets, and a great defensive line was very impressive to watch. My plus factor here, it has to be Justin Jefferson. I think that a lot of the times it is with the Vikings. Sometimes we just got to state the obvious here. 4 catches, 59 yards, and a touchdown in week 1 for Jefferson. But if you're going to keep up with the Niners and how well they play, you're going to need this dude to be explosive. So you got to have over 100 yards, I think, for Justin Jefferson. It's got to be a big day for him. So he is without a doubt the plus factor here for the Vikings to really keep up. But what about you? Who's your plus factor?
Yeah, I went somebody else on the Minnesota Vikings offense, and it's Aaron Jones, because San Francisco is going to try to take away Justin Jefferson. You now have Jordan Addison battling an ankle injury. So what's left over is Aaron Jones. And when we talked about Josh Jacobs having runs of over 10 plus yards, Aaron Jones had 5 rushes going 10 or more yards, which tied for first in the NFL. So Aaron Jones is capable of getting you first down. He seems to be a great fit for this Minnesota offense. And one little fact also, that is kind of neither here nor there, but it has to do with the teams itself. 49ers haven't won in Minneapolis in 32 years and have lost 7 consecutive games at the Metrodome and US Bank Stadium. That is courtesy of Dustin Baker, who does some great work on the Vikings beat, just so you know. And if you go back like 2 years ago, last year, that last year, that San Francisco game, nobody gave Minnesota a shot. Guess what?
I think a lot of stats that go back like that far are obviously silly, because you go back even just like 5 years ago and there's so many players and coaches that have nothing to do with the team anymore, unless we got curses involved, unless there's voodoo going on, unless there's something that's like worth done. And 32 years, there might be a curse going on there. So that actually, I might actually be picking up what you're putting down there.
I will say, as someone that goes from West Coast time to Central time, like Pacific to Central time, quite often, we don't talk enough about how there is inter-country jet lag. It makes a difference when you're a West Coast team traveling east into either the Central or Eastern time zones. I mean, I feel so groggy every single morning that I come back to Chicago and I'm like, ugh. So I'm not that I'm making excuses for these guys, but I'm just saying it stinks. It stinks.
The time change. That's the plus factor in this one. Waking up earlier, the body clogs. Let's move on to 2 undefeated teams going head to head. One of them, maybe we expected, the Seattle Seahawks, versus one that, well, I'll just let you know, I didn't expect it because I picked the Bengals in my survivor pool. Damn it.
Oh, you didn't.
Yeah. What do you mean I didn't? Is the Bengals at home versus the Patriots? And
yeah, I know, you're right. You're right. That was supposed to be the safe bet.
I'm not even going to joke about it. I'm mad about it. I'm mad online about it. So look, my matchup that matters in this one, though, it's Geno Smith going up against the Patriots secondary, because this was an impressive day from the Patriots all around. And I think they played really good ball. And yes, I think you can go back and watch that game and say, hey, if Tanner Hudson doesn't fumble the football, Bengals probably win that game anyways. But they didn't. And I think the Patriots put themselves in a position to win because something like that happened. When you look at Geno, week 1, 89.4 passing grade on throws of 10 yards or more. That was 8th in the NFL. 80.6 PFF grade when kept clean. So he is somebody who wants to take chances deep down the field. And when that offensive line of Seattle is able to keep him clean, that's what's really important. And they played really well this past week. In particular, it was Charles Cross. So, you look at the 49ers, the New England Patriots defensive line, Keon White played really well last week. is Seattle able to sort of mitigate what he has been as a pass rusher so far, or in the early parts of this 2024 season? If they can, and they can keep Geno clean, I think that he could have a big day. When you go to the Patriots secondary, though, that is something that is a talking point of how well they played, or at least maybe how well they fooled Joe Burrow, because the Bengals only attempted 7 throws beyond 10 yards last week. And Joe Burrow is normally a quarterback, especially when Jamar Chase is in the game. I know T. Higgins wasn't there, but when Jamar's in the game, he goes and gives his guy a chance. He's throwing it up to this dude. And he really did not do that much at all, even when the Bengals needed him to on that final drive that didn't end up going well for them. And I think a big reason is to sort of blend this in with my plus factor before I turn it over to you. Christian Gonzalez, the Patriots corner from the first round that they drafted last year, a stud when he was in his final year at Oregon. A lot of people thought that he could have been worthy of a top 10 overall pick. People talked about him and Devon Witherspoon going head to head. Funny that they're now on the same field, not going up against each other, but both of those dudes are there. Gonzalez covered Jamar Chase on 20 routes last week. 3 catches, 14 yards. Hell of a start to this season for a guy who's most of his rookie year was cut short due to injury last week. So, I mean, if we can get him to blanket DK Metcalf, then again, like we're talking about a secondary playing good enough for the Patriots to keep themselves in it. But I know I just kind of went back to back there. It felt like it flowed in well enough.
Sure,
but matchup that matters. What's your matchup that matters here?
Yeah, I'm going with the Pats O-line versus this Seattle defense, the pass rush. I mean, they had 29 pressures last week. It was second in the league. 13 pressures on 3rd and 4th down, which was tied for first. And you had 1 completion allowing 20 yards or more, which is tied for second in the NFL in week 1. This is not an easy defense to be going against. And we're going to really have to test this Patriots O-line in order to keep their guy clean, keep Jacoby Brissett clean. So I'm really wanting to see how that all materializes. And this actually does flow into my plus factor, because not only are they going to have to keep Jacoby Brissett clean, they are going to have to block for Ramondre Stevenson, who had a great game last week against the Bengals. 25 attempts, 120 yards, and a touchdown versus Cincinnati. So Jacoby only attempted 24 passes last week, and he completed only 15 of them for 121 yards. That is not enough through the air to get you some points, especially, again, against this Seattle defense. You are going to need to go to the ground. You're going to need to run the ball, and this is the only way to really break the will of an opposing defense is if you run all over them. So everything kind of hinges, as most everything usually does when it comes to offense, on the Patriots' offensive line.
Yeah. No, I think I'm with you on both of those things. Ramondre had an awesome day against the Bengals. I think he had, would you say 120 yards rushing, and just so many of them coming after contact, which is the most important part as well. So if you even know he can produce for you if the offensive line is not having a great day, but if they do have a great day, it only sort of amplifies what he can do even more. The New York Jets traveling to the Tennessee Titans, trying to make this a get-back game here for the Jets as they lost to the 49ers on Monday Night Football. My matchup that matters here is the Jets defensive line against the Titans offensive line. Now, the Titans offensive line, they didn't play as poorly as we saw in moments last year. Honestly, you and I have talked about it on this show. The emphasis that Bill Callahan's going to have on the offensive line for Tennessee, I think it's going to be a long-term play for them where they're going to play really well. But in week 1 against the Chicago Bears, which Chicago's got a good defensive line and they play great in week 1. I want to give them their credit, totally. But Chicago's D-line, Jets D-line, you're probably going to go with the Jets D-line here. Yeah. Titans offensive line was 30th in pass blocking grade overall last week, 48.4. Now they're going up against a defensive line that's got Quinnen Williams. It's got Michael Clemens. It's got Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald, Javon Kinlaw. Like, even without Hassan Reddick, these dudes can get after the passer. And that's what worries me a lot here for Tennessee's chances in this game and a matchup that matters, because if the Jets are just pissed off from how they played against the Niners and they really just come after that Titans offensive line, it could get ugly for Will Levis in that group, even with them being at home. So that to me is a matchup that could truly make or break this game. But what about you? What's your matchup that matters?
I flipped it. It's the Jets O-line and the Titans D-line. After seeing firsthand the Titans D-line in Chicago this past weekend, I think they're going majorly overlooked. And especially the rookie Tavondre Sweat, who is
Yeah.
just a massive dude with just brute strength. I talked to some of the Bears offensive linemen about him in particular and this defensive front, and it gave them fits. They honestly, I think some of them ended up apologizing to Caleb Williams because they really knew that they weren't playing up to their level that they wanted to, because the Titans D-line was much better than I think a lot of people are expecting. Not only do you have Tavondre Sweat, you have Harold Landry, you have Jeffrey Simmons. And the Jets O-line ranked 28th in pass blocking grade last week. That's not good when you have a 40-year-old quarterback. And that makes me concerned if I'm Aaron Rodgers and I'm having to be mobile coming off of an Achilles. We saw Kirk Cousins be a complete statue in the pocket.
Right.
Now, Aaron Rodgers had a little bit more movement, but you still don't want to test it. And that's why I think they end up pulling him in 4 minutes to go, though I still don't agree with it. It's just, you're going to need to stand up to the Titans defensive front. You're going to need to not overlook them. I think they put some really kind of eye-opening plays on tape. There was no flashy stats, there was no gaudy stats, but just from the eye test and seeing these guys and then talking to Bears offensive linemen that went against them, it's not going to be easy for this Jets offensive line.
Yeah, Sweat's the big X factor for me. I mean, we all know about Simmons. We know what Harold Landry can do, but the fact that Tavondre Sweat looked that good already week one, I mean, that's something that now you're talking about a formidable defensive line that's going to be tough to handle every week. Bears offensive lineman, I don't blame him. I mean, you don't get players who are as big as Tavondre Sweat who move the way that he does around very often, and so that's a unique matchup as well. My plus factor in this one, again, sort of a duh here. We'll go to Will Levis in the quarterback position. Levis earned a 29.9 passing grade last week. Not good for his performance in how they played against the Bears. But I will say this. In the first half, he earned a 56.1 passing grade. So they were playing decently well in that first half. You just got, I mean, that the third and fourth quarters, Levis just, I don't know if he was just getting impatient or he felt like, he just needed to play
force it.
Yeah, just way too much. He was trying to force it. And obviously, like the backwards flick to surrender Cobra interception that he had was, I mean, you got to get those way out of your system, man. And when I watched Levis, look, I went back and I watched all of his snaps. I don't think he played that poorly. Now, it sort of like came out that way as a result, but I guess probably the way that I should say it is this. He did play poorly. I think a lot of the biggest issues that he has are correctable. You got to set your footwork, man. You can't be back. I mean, that backwards flick of the wrist throw, that wasn't even the only one he had that game. He just had another one that didn't get picked off. So, like, he had multiple
There's a couple
plays.
near misses.
He had multiple plays like this where you just go, dude, completely eliminate those from your whatever your brain function is. Like, you can't even think about those plays being possible. Just take the sack. And I think that you will at least raise his floor to a level where he had some nice throws deep down the field. He had a couple of rips over the middle as well. So to me,
a couple of long third downs too that he converted in that first half, especially where I was like,
he's the total plus factor here, because if he raises the floor, then we might be able to talk about a back and forth game here with the Jets. But what about you? What's your plus factor?
Another kind of duh thing is Garrett Wilson, because clearly he's the guy that Aaron Rodgers is now comfortable with, and he's going to be going against L'Jarius Sneed. And Sneed had 31 snaps last week, 5 targets, 3 catches allowed for 30 yards, 2 catches allowed for a first down. It's not a whole lot. And Wilson recorded 6 catches on 60 yards with 11 targets in week 1. So 6 of his 11 catches or 11 targets hit. But you have to think that that's going to go up the more and more they kind of play together, because they didn't play, at least in preseason games, together, him and Aaron Rodgers. And this is kind of the symptom of that. This is kind of the reason that everybody was concerned about Aaron Rodgers not playing a whole lot in the preseason, not being around for mandatory minicamp, stuff like that. When it's more structured and we do get kind of closer to live reps, that stuff matters. And there was definitely some, bickering back and forth on the sideline. Rodgers is very particular with what he wants his receivers to do, the options that he has on certain routes, all of the little ticks that just come with reps that these guys don't have.
Yeah.
So I expect that those numbers to continue to go up and Garrett Wilson to continue to get the production as comfortable as Aaron Rodgers is with Alan Lazard. Alan Lazard is not the Alan Lazard of 3-4 years ago. And I think the sooner Aaron Rodgers accepts it.
Yeah, but to your point, like the first third down throw that he had of the game, he hits Lazard in the hands and it's just like completely dropped. And obviously the camera just immediately zooms in on Aaron Rodgers. Like, let's see how pissed off he is. And he's kind of just like staring at him like, dude, you're supposed to be the one receiver I know can catch the football. Like that, I know you're going to be where you're going to be at the right time. And that's going to take a little bit of time to work out. But I think Garrett Wilson's going to be fine. I mean, you saw some money throws from Aaron Rodgers still in that game. And
I think it's interesting, too, that Garrett Wilson wears the longer shoulder sleeves.
I think it was Will Blackman said this on Twitter, the Joey Galloway look with the long loose sleeves.
I was like, I'm like, that's interesting for a young player to then opt for, especially a receiver too. Like I feel like receivers are very particular about having, everything kind of buttoned down and
I know
make sure it's not impeding you. But like Garrett Wilson just has kind of this old school look to him. And I was like, did you do that because you're playing with a 40-year-old?
I kind of like it. I kind of like the throwback look. I really do.
It's different. And it's reminiscent of the football of old that we grew up with.
It is, no doubt about it. The New York Giants playing the Washington Commanders in Washington this week. Bounce back game for Washington. I think that this is sort of a game where if Washington's going to be something this season, they got to win this game, right? You've got to at least be able to say, okay, our floor is high enough to where we're going to beat one of the worst teams in the NFL. And my matchup that matters, we talked about this last week. I talked about it on the review show. I think I talked about it for the New York Giants when we were doing the Giants preview like 2 weeks ago on this channel. Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau, it's got to be better, man. Like it just straight up has to be better. And they were non-existent last week. They were totally non-existent against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, it's one of the better offensive lines in the NFL. We said that when we went through the preview show last week. It was going to be a tough test for him, but you pick Kayvon Thibodeau as high as you do for this matchup. You pay Brian Burns what you're paying him for this kinds of matchup. Both those guys, Burns, 5.6% pass rush win percentage. Come on. Thibodeau, 5% pass rush win percentage. We spent the whole offseason saying, oh man, now it's not just Dexter Lawrence anymore. Yes, it is. It's still just Dexter Lawrence. Yeah. And it's just something that it's got to be way, way better. They have a better matchup. Commanders 15th in pass blocking grade in week 1 as a team. But I think that everybody would say they're more vulnerable than an offensive line like the Minnesota Vikings are. So this is another matchup where I said it last week. Let's have them show up. They didn't show up. You got to show up this week. I mean, this is the week that you do it. You're not going to go up against Carolina Panthers every single week. It's the NFL. Right. You're prioritizing these players for a reason, and they got to step up. That is the matchup that matters, because if the Giants can't at least win that one with the stars they brought in to do something like that, I don't know where else this team's winning. So that's a huge matchup to me, because if they don't win there, I don't think they win basically any other position other than
it's a team you're really familiar with, and it's a team that has a lot of turnover on their end though too. So they're not probably going to be. Jane Daniels isn't familiar with the Giants. So it's one of those things you have to, to your point, you have to do it if you want to salvage this season at all. And going along with that, and the Giants not shooting themselves in the foot, except this is offensively now, my matchup that matters are the Giants wide receivers and their hands, because they led the league last week in drops. They had 5 drops in a single game. Yeah, I get that Daniel Jones is not playing well, but his receivers are not helping him. And your receiving yards leaders in that game, Blake Neighbors is leading your team, which is a duh. That's what we all thought. They only had 66 yards. And then you have 44 yards for Robinson. Slayton had 26, Johnson 18, Singletary 15. These guys are just non-factors right now. And that's not going to work. They need to be better when it comes to Daniel Jones, and he's throwing catchable balls, and you need to be able to catch them then. So it's a battle against their own hands. Figure out what to do with your hands, guys. You're not Ricky Bobby.
Fantastic reference. And the people appreciate it. I'm looking at your plus factor here, and you're going to talk about something in the red zone. I'm funny enough, I'm also talking red zone. Is Cliff Kingsbury kind of
I figured we'd play off each other here.
Is Cliff Kingsbury kind of cooking in the red zone? That's the question we need to be asking here, because were there things that the Commanders could have been better with? Yes, absolutely, this past week against the Buccaneers. But they were one of 5 teams that had a 100% red zone success rate. They were 3 for 3 in scoring in the red zone. So for as much as Cliff, gets criticism about not getting Terry McLaurin the ball and like some things that they're still ironing out, played well when it came to the red area and putting up points on the board. So just something to note is Cliff cooking in the red zone? That's my plus factor here. What about yours?
Well, on the other side of things, then it's Shane Bowen in the red zone.
There we go.
Because one of those other teams that was 100% in red zone possessions was the Minnesota Vikings last week. They went 2 for 2 in the red zone. And what worries me especially is that the Giants, you have some really young players in some really key positions when it comes to red area defending. You have Tyler Newman, Drew Phillips in that secondary as rookies. Mm-hmm. You have Darius Mausau. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he's a weak side linebacker. That's all going to be very important when it comes to shutting teams down in the red zone. And what you can scheme up in there that we saw was not very effective last week against Minnesota. So this is your opportunity to be effective this week against a team that was good, that maybe isn't a good team yet, but they certainly had success in the red zone, and you cannot let them do that again, because that is what obviously increases scoring production. And that's all. Like you could be the worst team in the world, but then score on every single one of your red zone possessions, and 3 of those things, and you could put the game out of reach.
Yeah. No, I think there's a reason why coaches emphasize it the way that they do. And I think that you're correct in recognizing that on the flip side, like you got to be able to stop people on the defensive side of the football as well. We got a couple more games that we're getting to for week 2 here, but a reminder that this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you like, or was that something you feel like you lost in childhood? Kids, they're always learning, they're always growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. Therapy can be a great way to help reconnect with your sense of wonder, because your back to school era, if you will, can come at any age. Therapy can be a really useful tool to get a better understanding of how your mind actually works and to become more aware of your own patterns and behaviors to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just people struggling with something specific. I've been doing therapy for over a year and a half. And again, it started with something specific for me, but now I use it very much the way that they're talking about here. And it's just something that's always able to kind of sharpen me. And I learn new things about myself all the time. It's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is convenient, flexible, and entirely online way to get therapy that is right for you. You can just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/PFF to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFF. Rams, Cardinals, finally into the 4 p.m. slate. Goodness gracious. What are we, 2 hours into the show? Still doing the 1 o'clock games? Rams at Cardinals. So we got a nice little division matchup here to start the afternoon slate. Your matchup that matters, Carmen. What do you got here?
I'm going to roll both my matchup that matters and my plus factor all into one because they're all related. It's Cooper Kupp versus the Cardinals cornerbacks, because Cooper Kupp had 21 targets in week 1, obviously ranked first in the league. 14 catches, which was 5 more than any other player, 110 yards, 6 catches gaining a first down, which is ranked second in the league in the first season. Or first week, rather. I, especially now with Puka Nacua on IR, this offense, as it does, runs through Cooper Kupp. And how can you handle him? He's going to be going up against our friend from Tampa, friend of mine, friend of ours, Sean Murphy-Bunting. He is going to be their best bet against Cooper Kupp. And 1 forced incompletion this last game, 30 snaps, 3 targets, 2 catches allowed for 12 yards. That's great. That's fantastic. You're going to need to do that now against one of the best receivers in the league.
Yeah,
so
and
that's going. That
Oh,
he's my
go
plus
ahead.
factor. He's my plus factor. My matchup that matters is just Cup versus the Arizona secondary.
No, it makes sense that you're wrapping that all into one, and it sort of plays off of my matchup that matters here for this one because the Rams' offensive line, by the time the game was ending in Detroit last week, they were down to just two of their slated starters along the offensive line. They had injuries throughout, and it was not good. When you look at their overall performance, whether it was the starters or the guys that came in afterwards, they allowed the most QB hits, 8. They allowed the most pressures, 23. Recorded a 16.2 PFF grade as a whole unit in week 1. I mean, that was dead last in the NFL, as you would expect. On the flip side, they're sort of going up against a Cardinals defensive line that also was not great in week 1. Lowest pass rush grade in the NFL at 50.6. Only 10 pressures in week 1, which is just 26 in the NFL. So it's sort of like which worse is worse, right? Like, which of these units is actually going to be the poorer unit, and can the other one actually capitalize on it? And if the Rams are going to struggle on the offensive line, to your point, Cooper Kupp only becomes that much more valuable because Matthew Stafford's going to be getting rid of the ball immediately. They're not dumb. They'll be able to see how the offensive line is doing in practice. They know how they did this past Sunday against the Lions, and so they're going to, like, Cooper Kupp is going to have to be the hot receiver on basically every single call. Like, he's going to have to run a route where he can get open and Matthew Stafford can at least give him a chance if he's got to get rid of the ball before 2.5 seconds. So to me, 21 targets last week, obviously that's a lot, but might be in for another 21 this week. So Sean Murphy-Bunting might have his hands full. That's a matchup that matters. I also think that my plus factor here has to be the Rams' run defense because for the Cardinals, not just the Kyler Murray aspect of it, James Conner's a good back, and I think he's a really underrated back. And he's graded out at elite levels before in his career. He didn't have an elite performance this past week, but it's just always some tough runs. I love Trey Benson being the spellback as well. The Rams' run defense, highest EPA per rush allowed in week 1 for this team. So it's sort of the Cardinals, what they want to do the most, running the ball, could play right into a weakness of the Rams defensive line now with guys like Kobe Turner and Braden Fisk. Although their run defense grades weren't terrible, just as a whole, they were not really able to hold the Lions the way that they needed to when they decided to go to the ground game. So I think that's a plus factor here, is how the Rams can defend the run. Because if they can defend it well, and all of a sudden now you're forcing Matthew Stafford to be a passer, well, you're already down Cooper Kupp. We know the offensive line didn't pass block well last week. So I think all of those factors go into it there. The next game, we've got the Steelers at the Broncos. Obviously, the incredible Russell Wilson homecoming game. There's going to be a big celebration for him. Jumbotron, full 18-minute tribute video. Okay, probably not. What is your matchup that matters here as the Steelers travel to Denver against the Broncos?
I mean, yeah, it's not, Russ isn't even going to play. It doesn't look like. So
Right.
This is Justin Fields' game, and therefore it is the job of the Denver front seven to contain Justin Fields, because now that you know that this is your guy, they spent all preseason preparing for Russ to be the starter. And now you have Justin Fields, who does have that mobility and is a fantastic runner. He, among quarterbacks last week, he had the third most rushing yards with 57 on 14 carries, 5 rushes gaining a first down. We know that he can do that. And 43 rushing yards after contact as a quarterback. So that's something that you have to account for if you're the Denver front seven. And especially it's going to lead into, I don't know if you want me to do it now, but it's going to lead into my plus factor of how this Pittsburgh offense can be successful. This Pittsburgh defense, it's nothing new for Pittsburgh. This team runs through its defense, and its defense limiting the amount of points its opponent scores. But that means the offense still has to score more. And the way that they're going to do that with Justin Fields is probably going to be on the ground, not only because we haven't seen Justin Fields be super effective as a passer, but also because, the Steelers don't really have a lot of weapons for him to begin with. So you have to kind of figure out how this offense it's a ground and pound offense. We're seeing a lot now that we're really starting to really preview these games. It's interesting how many times I find myself being like, yeah, no, this is going to be a run first offense. and how the league is kind of shifting a little bit. Maybe obviously not entirely; it's still a passing league, but there are some teams that are zigging while the others are zagging.
Yeah, well, I think that we've seen some trends already in the early parts of the season where, running the ball is becoming more and more valuable because of how much teams are setting up to defend the pass on defense. And so that will be a very interesting trend that we're going to make sure that we keep tabs on here at PFF of just how valuable the run is becoming because of how much defenses are really leaning towards limiting the pass. And it felt like quarterback numbers were down across the board in the NFL
league
this
in
year.
week one.
Right. So are we going to see teams be able to lean into that more and more? You can go right ahead into your plus factor because my plus factor kind of bounces off yours, and I can round it out with my matchup that matters. But my plus factor has to be for the Steelers, any non-George Pickens wide receiver. Tight ends included, running backs included. I don't care. Somebody show up. George Pickens, 85 receiving yards last week. The next closest with Pat Freiermuth with 27. Now I understand Justin Fields isn't exactly the prolific passer that's going to be dicing defenses through the air all the time. But it's got to be somebody other than Pickens. And we talked about that before the season as well. I think we talked about that last week with the Steelers offense when we were doing our preview of week one. Somebody's got to show up other than him. But who is your plus factor in this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy to take away one guy if you're a defense, and that's what teams are going to try to do against George Pickens. So it's Najee Harris, because Najee Harris only had a 3.5 yards per carry average against the Atlanta Falcons. He had 20 attempts for 70 yards, but 20 attempts on top of having your quarterback run 14 times, by the way. So clearly Arthur Smith is leaning into this being a ground game, and part of that is going to have to present defenses with multiple runners to contend with because, again, like we were talking about, defenses are lighter, they're faster, they're more sophisticated, but that's to contend with the pass. To run the ball, you just got to have a really good offensive line blocking for you and a really hard-nosed runner, which we know Najee Harris can be. Mm-hmm. So you need to kind of give defenses decisions to make when it comes to who are they going to key in on. Can they safely key in on the running back, or are you going to send Justin Fields on some designed runs? We know we can do that in Chicago. That was such a point of emphasis for Chicago fans with Luke Getsy, the offensive coordinator at the time, saying, why aren't you designing more runs for Justin Fields? He can do it. So now I fully expect that to be the case, but in order for that to be a real threat, you need to have another running back.
Yeah, and I think that, a lot of people had high hopes for Jaylen Warren as well. He played, but coming off the hamstring injury,
2 attempts, 7 yards.
Right. He just didn't get emphasized a lot. So I wonder if they're still just easing him in because hamstrings are tricky. You don't want to lean all on that. Look, my matchup that matters in this game, we're sort of going in reverse order here. This is, again, what I think could be an absolute game wrecker where you could talk about everything. You could talk about corner and wide receiver matchups. You could talk about quarterbacks and run game, everything. If this matchup here goes as south as it has the potential to me, none of it matters. Broncos offensive line versus the Steelers defensive line. Broncos offensive line last week against the Seattle Seahawks, 59.1 overall blocking grade, which is 29th in the league, 47.1 run blocking grade, which is 31st in the league, and allowed the second most pressures, which is 19 in the NFL in week one. They're going up against a Steelers defensive line. TJ Watt had a 94.6 pass rushing grade in week one and a 90.6 pass rushing grade as a whole team in week one was the Steelers. Wow. The Broncos, we talked about them a lot, the most expensive offensive line in the NFL. They did not play up to their price tag this past week. And if they play similarly against the Steelers defensive line is even better. I mean, again, I keep saying JJ Watt. TJ Watt can take over the game himself if the Broncos play the way that they did last week. So there are so many little things about this game that could, be the game of inches, if you will. Coin flip, ball bouncing one way or the other. If the Broncos offensive line doesn't play a hell of a lot better than they played last week, TJ Watt is just going to absolutely eat them alive. So will Cam Hayward, so will everybody else on the defensive line, because that is what they are capable of. The Bengals try to bounce back after a pretty crushing loss against the New England Patriots, if you can have one in week one. And it doesn't get any easier this week as they travel to Arrowhead to take on the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, this is a matchup that everybody should be very, very excited about because the Bengals and the Chiefs over the last 3-4 years have played some epic matchups in the playoffs and in the regular season. Burrow has been one of the few quarterbacks who can go into Arrowhead and actually look like he'd go toe-to-toe with Mahomes in that environment. What's the matchup that matters most here for you in this game?
I think it's basically how the Bengals decide they're going to handle Xavier Worthy now that we know that he just takes the top off of this Chiefs offense and he is that X factor, pun intended with his first name.
Right.
Like that this offense needed. And the fact that obviously Patrick Mahomes can get him the ball at any given moment. I mean, the Chiefs led week 1 with 17 plays, gaining 10 or more yards this past week. And Xavier Worthy had 2 receptions for 47 yards. So if you get him involved any more than that, I mean, we know he's capable of the explosive plays plus that end around touchdown for 21 yards. He's an absolute explosive play machine, and you need to be able to take him out of the game. So whether that's with Cam Taylor-Britt or Dax Hill, who was I think you talked about that being your hipster pick of the week last week.
Yes.
They're going to need those guys to really kind of put a cap on this offense and its capabilities and Xavier Worthy in particular.
Yeah, I think that Dax Hill is also one of the, few defensive backs that the Chiefs would have that could athletically match up with Xavier Worthy, because there's not a lot. And I don't mean that like as an insult. No. There's not a lot of defensive backs that can match up with that speed, but I feel like Dax Hill is a good enough athlete to at least, contend for that. A matchup that matters to me, we saw, especially as the game went on with the Chiefs and the Ravens, Steve Spagnuolo in his bag exploiting whatever the weakest link was for the Baltimore Ravens, and he just moved Chris Jones
all around.
I mean, like, it's an absolute cheat code how they do that. And unfortunately for the Bengals, there is a glaring weak link on their offensive line, and it's at right tackle. So we saw as the game went on against the Ravens, Chris Jones aligning as a left defensive end, so going up against the right tackle, so left defensive end or Leo or like whatever you wanted to call his position and how he was aligned. 91.7 pass rush grade when going up against the right tackle in week 1 was Chris Jones. Trent Brown, who is the right tackle for the Bengals, 48.5 passing grade. So, sorry, pass blocking grade. It's just, it cannot be that devastatingly low, or Chris Jones could potentially win this game himself, because we did not see, getting into my plus factor here, which is Joe Burrow, specifically under pressure. Burrow, 54.4 passing grade last week when under pressure. Turnover-worthy play. I mean, it did not look good from Burrow under pressure. He was rattled. He was skittish. And if you put Chris Jones as a factor here in this one, Burrow's just got to play a lot more confident than he did under pressure, because we know it's going to be coming for him. But who's your plus factor here?
That's actually a perfect segue into my plus factor, which is also Joe Burrow, except it is his last name spelled Burreaux, because I need him playing with the confidence we saw in college with his college teammate in Ja'Marr Chase.
I like it.
Do you see what I did here?
I like it. I like it, Carmen. I like it.
Because not only did Joe Burrow not play like Burrow, he played not. Ja'Marr Chase didn't either. But no, I'm going. I keep going. Like I said, I'm reeling on the LSU stuff right now. I'm engaged to an LSU guy. This is life for me now.
It happens, people.
It happens. 6 targets for Ja'Marr Chase. He did have 6 catches for 62 yards. 3 catches gaining a first down. But only had 1 catch gaining 15 or more yards. That is not the stat line we're used to seeing from Ja'Marr Chase. We're not used to seeing nothing in the touchdown column. He was absolutely hurting without T. Higgins on the field. T. Higgins could potentially return this week. It would go a long way if he could, but he was officially listed as day-to-day by the Bengals now as of Wednesday. So we're going to see if that works. But I need the Joe and Ja'Marr connection from LSU back in Cincinnati against the team that they are supposed to perform against, that everybody relies on them to perform against. I mean, the Cincinnati Bengals are touted as highly as they are because they are able to contend with the Chiefs year in and year out so far, even given Joe Burrow's injury history. So I need to see it.
Yeah.
Give me Burrow.
I was going to say, I don't really, I mean, I get it, like football. I think that sometimes we look at the game of football and we like to criticize, and it's split-second decisions and all that kinds of stuff. And when I watched the Bengals game, Burrow just didn't want to throw the ball. And there were times when it's like, yeah, okay, Jamar's not open, but you've thrown
But
the
since
ball
when has
to
that
him.
stopped you?
Right. Like you've thrown the ball to him when he's not open before. And it felt like he just was not as willing to give his guys a chance. Now, I don't know if in his defense, I guess is probably not the way to say it. With full context, Joe Burrow normally stinks in week 1. And in fact, this past week was the highest single game week 1 passing grade he's had in his career. Now, there's been other things that have sometimes affected that, like injury or whatever, but like he did not play well, particularly well this past weekend. And that was his highest passing grade that he has had in a week 1 in any of his career. That's
a great stat. It's really shocking.
Does not like week 1. The Bengals have not won an opening game since 2021. And it's just, I don't know. I don't know what it is. It takes this time. It takes his team. It takes Joe Burrow a couple of weeks to warm up. And it shouldn't, because you don't really want to be
He's not going to get that He's not going to get that this season. They're going against the Chiefs now.
I know. So all of a sudden, better look a lot better, or it's going to be tough. Sunday Night Football is the Chicago Bears facing the Houston Texans. This one's in Houston. Matchup that matters here from you, Carmen. What do you think about this one?
It's Caleb Williams versus the Houston pass rush. He only took 2 sacks against Tennessee. Obviously did not look comfortable, though, all day against that Tennessee defensive front. Houston didn't really do much into the pass rush last week, which is, I think, not indicative of what we should expect from DeMeco Ryans. They had the second fewest total pressures in week 1. Only the Panthers had worse. So that gives you some context there. That presents an opportunity for this Bears O-line, which I do think is improved. And it's important that they show that they are improved and not get taken by surprise like they were against Tennessee. However, Caleb Williams, given that he is new to the league, he is new to this system, all of his weapons are new to this system, all of that stuff, his average time to throw was the 3rd longest at 4.31 seconds. Houston has Danielle Hunter. I will repeat. Caleb Williams takes 4.31 seconds to throw the ball on average, and the Houston Texans have Danielle Hunter. Danielle Hunter was quiet last week. I don't expect that to continue. Not in DeMeco Ryan's scheme. So the key is limiting points here, because we don't know what this Bears offense can really do. And like I don't know. It's gonna be really interesting, because I think that Houston also has an opportunity here to really just kind of mess with this Bears offense.
Yeah, time to throw has been, sort of an issue for Caleb Williams. So I obviously like him being able to excel.
I expect it to get better, for the record.
I
expect it to get better. I think he gets more comfortable in the offense. But
a singular matchup. Normally we talk about like a certain unit or position group going up against each other. There is a singular matchup that I'm really looking forward to that I think is going to matter a lot in this game. It's Nico Collins going up against Jalen Johnson, the stud corner for the Bears, going up against the stud receiver for the Houston Texans. In single coverage last week, Nico Collins, 94.8 receiving grade. I mean, he is showing that last year was not a fluke. His elite play last year was not just a one-year wonder type of a thing. Excellent game last week, especially against single coverage. Jalen Johnson in single coverage last week, 92.3 PFF grade, 13 snaps, 2 targets, 0 catches allowed, 1 interception, 1 forced incompletion. He is showing that last year was not any sort of fluke, and it is, in fact, who he is moving forward. The contract was worth it, all that good stuff. So that one-on-one matchup, 2 guys that love to play single coverage and are great, or should I say elite at it, that is a major matchup that matters in this one, because whoever is winning that one most of the time, yes, Houston has other weapons that they could go to, and Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs, and like the other parts of the group have to step up. There's no doubt. But if Jalen is getting beat in single coverage, well, that's going to make it tough for the rest of the defense, especially that secondary, to play the way that they need to. But if he is playing well, then it certainly gives the Chicago Bears an opportunity to go up against and match up against one of the best and most talented offenses that we have in the league. So who is your plus factor here for this game?
It is specifically the Bears' 3rd down defense. Now, they did well against the Titans on 3rd down, and that was great, but C.J. Stroud is not Will Levis. In fact, C.J. Stroud on 3rd and 4th down last week was 9 for 9, 85 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So this is like the definition of clutch. And if the Houston Texans are allowed to convert all of these 3rd and 4th downs and go down the field and score on you, on these third and fourth downs. That's demoralizing for the defense. And it also does not put a cap on the scoring that CJ Stroud is capable of leading this Houston offense too. So I really think that particularly this is going to come down to how well the Bears do on third down and their secondary in particular. We know, like you said, talked about Jalen Johnson. Tyreek Stevenson won Defensive Player of the NFC Defensive Player of the Week after he had the pick six and is starting to see the field really well. You saw this Bears defense, especially the back level, clamp down in the second half of last week's game. However, again, that was the Tennessee Titans. This is now the Houston Texans and CJ Stroud with all of those weapons that we just mentioned. So get off the field on third down or get them off the field, I should say, on third down and you're good.
Yeah, it is tough. I mean, my plus factor, it is CJ, and it has to be because, you mentioned some of the third down statistics of how well he played. Just watching his game back, again, was it a perfect game? No, I think he had like 2 or 3 turnover-worthy plays. One of them was an interception, but it was a flag, so it didn't count, right? And there are moments where he could have been better, but you watch him play against the Colts this past week, and he shows you everything you want from a franchise quarterback. Off-platform throws, in-structure throws, on the run, navigating the pocket, keeping his eyes downfield, going to different reads in the progression, keeping his eyes downfield for the big play as well, being fearless in the red zone. Like you talked about his third down, the clutch gene, playing well on third down. CJ Stroud showed you everything you wanted to see last week. And it was a tough game. It was a division game. It was down to the wire. It was a 2-point game. And Stroud came away victorious. And again, it wasn't perfect, but it was like damn, give me that guy for the next, I don't want to say 10 years because people, I think, over-exaggerate how long NFL players stay good in this league. But you give me this guy for the next 5, 6, 7 years, and I'm just going to I feel like you're going to be so happy. He is already ascending into one of the top 10 quarterbacks in this league, and I think that he should.
I also don't feel like that timetable is true for quarterbacks, though. I mean, we've seen quarterbacks, in particular, because their careers are so long, be good.
No, that's true. You can play
quite a long time.
You can play into a long, like having a long career. There's no doubt about it. But I always, as a draft guy, it bothers me so much when people go, oh, just draft this guy, draft this offensive tackle number 3 overall, and you won't have to worry about it for the next 10 years. What offensive tackles are playing for 10 straight years in an all-pro level that you don't have to worry about? Nobody. Who does that?
Trent Williams does that, but
Trent Williams, Joe Thomas.
Tristan Wirfs.
You're basically calling this player a Hall of Famer without calling him a Hall of Fame. And so I always think that's so ridiculous. I hate the whole just draft him and you'll never have to worry about him for a decade. I think it's a stupid phrase. I want it to be gone.
Is this the first Trevor rant that we're getting?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think we got it here at the end of the 2-hour show, but you did it. You did it, Carmen. You pushed the button, and there it was, me blowing up into my my annoyance level. So we got one more game to talk about. It's a Monday Night Football game. The Atlanta Falcons traveling to Philadelphia to take on the Philadelphia Eagles. Battle of the Birds, if you will, here. What is the matchup here for you, Carmen, that we got to watch?
Yeah. Well, I would have made Saquon my plus factor, but I have a different plus factor for that. This is just Saquon versus the field. This is Saquon versus the Atlanta front seven. Obviously, they had the hat trick in Brazil. He was the only running back in the NFL with 2 red zone rushing touchdowns as well. So in particular, just talk about a clutch gene, talk about a guy that is going to get you over the goal line. It is Saquon Barkley. He looked like the Saquon Barkley from 3-4 years ago when he was at the height with the Giants. I mean, this is just an incredible display of a resurgent player that we kind of thought was on his starting to enter the twilight of his career. When really, I think he was just on a bad Giants team, and now you get to see him on an offense that is completely loaded. And I really think that if this keeps up, and again, that game was not one I'm going to glean too much off of, given how bad the playing surface was and how many extenuating circumstances there were in Brazil. But Saquon Barkley adds a dimension to an already stacked Philadelphia offense that is now under Kellen Moore. I just really see the Eagles being back this season, and you're going to have to contend with him if you're Atlanta. Have any hope?
I loved how emphasized he was in every way. This is a guy who is talented enough to be utilized as an offensive X factor, the way that we see Christian McCaffrey be emphasized with the 49ers. And I think their offensive line goes into it, their overall game plan goes into it, but it sure as hell looked like the Eagles are ready to lean into everything that Saquon Barkley can do for them. And it just felt like that, whether the Giants wanted to do that or not, they weren't capable of doing that while he was in New York. And it feels like that's the case now with Philly. So we're watching one of the most talented players in the league now get to play in an offense that can unlock a lot of those talents. And so that is definitely a fun matchup, one that the Falcons have to put as maybe priority number one. Well, I don't know about priority number one. It's probably,
I know, because then you got AJ Brown.
I was going to say, don't let AJ Brown, get 5 explosives on you. But after that, contain Saquon a little bit. My matchup that matters here, I'm going to go with Kirk Cousins' mobility versus the Eagles' defensive line, because when you look at the Eagles' defensive line, it didn't lead the lead or anything in pressures, but 19 pressures in week 1, that was top 10, that was 10th in the league, 22 snaps with a blitz, which was 9th in the NFL, so they want to bring that pressure, they want to stay aggressive up on that front. Cousins couldn't move last week.
No,
and
literally at all.
He's coming off of the Achilles tear, so we knew that the mobility was going to be a little bit limited for him, but it was much worse than I thought, because it also impacted the game plan. 0 snaps under center, 0 snaps from play action. Those 2 things are the entire reason why you go get Kirk Cousins. If you want to talk about building an offense around this guy and making him worth it for you, it is because you have play action and you get to play under center because he's good at it. You look at some quarterbacks that don't really like playing under center, because in order to play under center, to have the play action game, you got to turn your back to the line of scrimmage. And so you've got to be able to, when you turn back around with the ball, analyze things very quickly. Some quarterbacks just don't like doing it. So playing,
and it's not really done in college that much anymore. So
right, exactly. So playing under center, especially in a play action offense, is sort of a lost art for a lot of quarterbacks. It's not for Cousins. It's why he's been so good over the last couple of years. And this guy can't move to the point where you can't call these plays. You better hope that this isn't the version of him that you signed, because I don't know if he's going to be worth that contract for you if you cannot allow him to execute the play action game. So does the mobility get any better this week? Are there any play action calls? Are there any plays with him under center? Because the Eagles defense is going to come at you, and they're going to pressure you for as good as the Falcons offensive line can be, which they've got to be better. Kirk also has to be, you've got to have a game plan that is less vanilla than the one that we saw this past week for sure. But what's the plus factor for you?
Yeah, that leads right into my plus factor, which is the Atlanta offensive line, because they were second to last in pass blocking grade last week with 44.3. It's not good when you have a guy that cannot move. Not only could Kirk not move, it didn't look like he could even plant and get the torque on the ball that he needed to. He has a decent arm when, before this injury, he had a decent arm. Without being able to plant your foot and really turn your body into it. I don't know what good Kirk Cousins is to you for all the reasons you just said, on top of the fact that even when he is a statue in the pocket, it's not as if his balls have the zip or, the accuracy even that we're used to seeing from him. So it's just a bad situation. And I guess this is why you end up getting Michael Penix Jr. It's very interesting to me, because we still did see some mobility out of Aaron Rodgers coming off the same injury, who is 5 years older than Kirk Cousins. So it's interesting that Kirk Cousins is not as far along. He did, I guess, injure the Achilles that much later in the season. Maybe that's, it's just going to take a few weeks for him to really trust it, whereas Aaron Rodgers has been back a little bit longer. It's going to be really interesting, though. I do think you give him a few weeks, but let's not forget you have the 8th overall pick waiting in the wings for him.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, you have to look at that 8th overall pick a little bit different now, right? You have to look at it like, okay, the pick sort of didn't make sense when you tried to spin it on draft weekend. Right. Because they were trying to make it seem like, oh yeah, he's like best case scenario. Kirk plays for 4 years for us. We get to the playoffs multiple times. We win a Super Bowl or whatever. And he's like, worst case scenario, Kirk plays a couple of years for us. And then Michael Penix just goes right in. And we've already got a guy that we like in the building. You go, that is a very expensive long-term, backup plan. But you now have to sit here and wonder. And obviously, like you said, we want to give it a couple of weeks. But you have to sit here and wonder if Terry Fontenot could have told us the whole truth on draft weekend, would he have said to us, we do not know if his Achilles will ever be healthy again? And we had to draft Michael Penix Jr. because we don't know. We don't think we're going to be bad enough for a quarterback. And we don't like the future scouting of what the quarterback class is coming up next year. So we're drafting this guy. And it's actually out of fear that Cousins might not really be the quarterback that we thought that he was going to be, because we've already kind of like gotten him around the building or whatever. It's just very curious if that is going to be the case. My plus factor is the other quarterback is Jalen Hurts. Hurts was bad against the Green Bay Packers. The Eagles won, and sometimes you need games where you win and your quarterback doesn't play well. But Jalen Hurts got to play way better if this team is going to get to where they want to get to win the division and so much more. 33.3 passing grade this past week. He had 4 turnover-worthy throws. He then had the fumbled snap on the goal line, which was another turnover-worthy play. And almost, I think all of those turnover-worthy plays were bad. Like they weren't even, I'm going to give my guy a chance type of a throw when it was turnover worthy. It was, you should not have let that ball out of your hand. And I don't know if he was not trusting the turf either, but his feet were very fractioned from his throwing motion. It was not like a married throwing motion. Hurts was all over the place. It did not look good for him. The good news is they won the football game, but it's absolutely got to be better for him, because if he has a repeat performance like that, they can lose to anybody. And he's got to be just much better as a quarterback. So
yeah, I really do blame a lot of that, though, I think, on the turf. I mean, we're going to see this week, obviously, but if you watch Jordan Love's performance even before he got injured, he did not have success when he had to plant his feet and when he had to set his feet. It wasn't working for him. Most of his explosive plays, his big plays, all of that came on the run, because he just would slide if he was trying to set his feet. And I think that was probably the case with Jalen Hurts too. But I agree with you. He needs to show us that was a one-off. That was because of the playing conditions. And that is not, he didn't regress in this new system in Philadelphia. And we're going to see.
Could very well be the case. And we'll definitely see with them being at home for Monday Night Football and a familiar turf, and hopefully some more confidence that we're used to seeing from Jalen Hurts for this one. There we go. 16 up, 16 down. Week 2.
Right? Like we finished in 2 hours, like completely.
We're on it. We're on it. You guys want 16 game previews in a 2-hour format? We got you. Almost down to like the minute here. I don't know what it's going to be like the second our producer like hits end, but I swear we're at like 1:59 or like 2 hours, just like on the dot.
Virtual high five.
Punctuality. People love it. Thank you guys so much for watching and tuning in to the preview show. For myself, Trevor Sikkema, and for Carmen Vitali. We will see you guys next Thursday as we preview once again all the games in the upcoming slate here on the PFF NFL show. Thanks guys for watching.